Welcome to the Chaplain's Compass, where we're navigating the intersections of spiritual care, healthcare, and human compassion. I'm John Betts.
And I'm Elise Tremaine, and today we're excited to talk about compassion science. We're honored to sit down with Maureen Shelton, an ACPE Certified Educator at Emory Healthcare, a certified instructor in cognitively based compassion training, and one of the innovators behind compassion centered spiritual health, which we will be referring as CCSH throughout this episode. She's the Director of Education and Training at Emory Spiritual Health, and she's also the Director of the Division of Compassion Centered Spiritual Health, or CCSH. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm excited because you just recently co-authored a study published in Plus One, which demonstrates something that chaplains we've long intuited, but you can think about it, but at the same time, it's also nice to be like, oh, there's actually evidence that this is true. The idea that compassion, it doesn't just feel good, uh, it's actually improves patient outcomes. So today we're going to be asking, how does compassion become evidence-based care?
Yeah, we're excited to get into it. And first, can you just give us a background about how did this vision for CCSH or compassion centered spiritual health come about? How did it emerge? What convinced you that chaplains needed this model?
Thank you so much. Great question. Um, so about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we were as a whole faculty here at Spiritual Health looking at how we can integrate more mindfulness practices into our work with staff in particular, because we were getting a lot of requests. So we were all going out and trying on different methods. And one of my residents at the time, part of the reason why he chose to come to Emory was because the Emory Compassion Center was here, and he was very interested in CBCT. So he told me about it. He said, "Marie, you should go try it out." And so I went and took the class with Dr. Nagy. And at the time, I had been an educator for about 20 years or so and had navigated a lot of the ups and downs of being a educator and a chaplain, and as we all know about. And when I took the class of CBCT with Dr. Nagy, the originator of CBCT at the Compassion Center, I just became so aware as I was in the class of how many different ways that CBCT was offering um, some capacity to make more visible resources and skills that could be supportive of our ACPE education and training for chaplains. I brought this back to our executive director, Dr. George Grant, and we all decided as our whole faculty to take the course together. And then this kind of helped to create the conditions for us to say, oh, maybe this would be helpful to teach to our chaplains. And then we did. And then as we taught it to our chaplains and to our learners, it became more visible that they wanted to spontaneously use it in their spiritual care. And we said, oh, okay, this is really interesting. Let's see if we can create a model that will help them engage this with some more awareness of how they can use these insights more spontaneously and in the midst of a visit to create more of this sense of, in the midst of challenging times as they practice these skills, being able to access these skills with more sustainability, spontaneity, and to perhaps polish our lenses to see how we can be more inclusive in our spiritual care. So this was something that just unfolded, and then our incredible research team started to say, well, let's research this. So that's what we've been about, is researching it, developing it, and seeing what works and what we can refine.
It's very funny. I remember when I first heard about CBCT was actually from our mutual colleague, Kim Palmer, and she was talking about it, and I was like, "What is CBCT? CBCT?" And she was giving us an update of that, and I took one of her trainings that was at the, Association of Professional Chaplains annual conference, and it was fascinating to me, and I was also, at the time, in a very transitional period of my life where I'm like, "Well, what do I need to do?" And my my wife, was just we were like, "Well, we're moving to Atlanta." So I remember I wrote you an email. I think I still have that email where you're like, "Well, here's what CBCT is about," and uh, I put it in the back of my head, and so we, yeah, it's one of those beautiful things that we ended up putting most of our uh, uh, at Wellstar, we put most of our chaplains through it, and it's been very helpful for us as well.
Yeah, that was a wonderful connection. I remember that day, John, and I've been so grateful for our conversations and the continued partnership.
So going with that, so you're from CBCT to CCSH. You're a CBCT instructor. So how does cognitively based compassion training translate from the contemplative theory, based in like Lojong Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, uh, that has been secularized to actually the lived practice of chaplaincy and clinical pastoral education?
One of the things, just as a background again to this development, was that we started to make sure as we were introducing and doing interviewing with our learners, particularly the residents, to let them know that we were going to be using this training so that they would be aware ahead of time. And then we gave them some resources to get to know about it so they could have some discernment if they wanted to engage in a program that infused this fully into their curriculum. Just to address more directly your question around CBCT, cognitive based compassion training, and why it could be of help, um, is that these 8 practices of CBCT, which are a combination of mindfulness, settling practices, as well as more cognitive reframing, analytic practices. These sort of first 3 are really about like how do we settle ourselves enough in what we call the zone of well-being, which CBCT has borrowed from Elaine Miller Karas's model, to see where am I in the zone of well-being, and how do I use my awareness of my senses, my sensations, my emotions to tell me where I am in the zone of well-being. Am I in a place where I'm feeling activated in the fight flight or in the freeze mode? Am I in that place more centered in the zone of well-being where I can take new perspectives, where I can reflect? And so this capacity to be able to check in, and of course, this is a value in CPE, but this is maybe just making more visible how to practice this skill. Like one of our current residents is saying, I have never really been aware of what's happening in my physical being. I don't know. So I'm not sure. I'm just focused on pouring out to others. So what we hope in CBCT is it gives a way to notice where I am, to have these practices of settling myself more, and this perhaps makes more visible how we use our different faith traditions if we are associated with one, like our different resources within those to use them more spontaneously in the moment. So those settling practices are so key. And then when we get to the reframing, the analytic practices, which help us with self compassion. Once we're more settled into the zone of well being, we can get more of this sense of how can I catch the spark we call when I am being overly harsh on myself internally, like even in the midst of a visit or post a visit or before a visit, and catching that spark more and saying, how can I cultivate more perspectives that help to infuse me with a sense of having more kindness towards my vulnerabilities and limitations so that I have a more abiding sense of self compassion. And this takes practice. And that's what CBCT does. It gives us a way to keep practicing through the modules, insights of meditation, informal practices, journaling, mindful dialogue that we return to and over again. And eventually in the modules, we get to bringing this to our relationships with others to have a more inclusive frame of, like, catching the spark again of when I might be going into judgment, my unconscious bias, even making that more visible, so I can catch that spark and stay attuned to my common humanity with others, that this person in front of me is a full human being with full resources, and let me see how I can then see our interdependence and have the sense of cultivated warm-heartedness that helps me see what I can do. And then honor that and seeing that as a real way of offering comfort and relief of distress. And so it's very much helps to create the inner conditions perhaps for co-created spiritual care.
I love that co-created spiritual care. It's so powerful. I'm thinking back, Maureen, to when I took CPE, which was 20 years ago, you know. I had wonderful supervisors. I think they taught us some of that, maybe using different language, but I'm trying to envision what it looks like to embed CCSH directly into clinical pastoral education. What did it take to embed that instead of just offering it as an add-on workshop or, a special addition to the training?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I mean, ACPE education is this action, reflection, action mode is just such a key aspect of CPE and has been doing this for, all these years. And so what we thought was just to see again, can we develop a model that has some common language for us to talk about these skills that honors and is grounded in each person's tradition, but gives us some way to talk about the skills that perhaps are underneath these learning ACPE outcomes and objectives, to see if we can get behind them, get underneath them, and see what's causing perhaps some roadblocks to compassion and see how we can address that. So to embed it by taking what we did was we had after, our incredible faculty was all said yes. I think we had about 8 faculty at the time to say we agree that this can be something we put in the curriculum. So we teach all of our residents um, over 4 full days, one day a week, the full course of CBCT. Then we give them some time, the first unit, to integrate this into their personal practice and to see how it might be a benefit to their, learning goals and to be supportive of their group work. Because you can see all these skills can now actually perhaps help people in their group life as well. And then after that first unit, then the second unit, we do 3 units of CPE. We teach them CCSH, which is a manualized research-based approach that we continue to work with. And then we just are basically saying, here are 4 different, movements within a visit that we think happens, consistently, and that we want to see within those 4, movements within a consultation to see how we can infuse the CBCT insights into each of those to make more visible different options we have, along with best practices in spiritual care and all the training that they've brought with them. So CCSH is just trying to help make more visible the resources that we all carry within us. And so that's how we've embedded. They write some CCSH cases, along with their verbatims as residents. They do about 4 or 5 of those, and they bring those to their educator. They bring that to their group of residents, the whole group. We have a large group of residents across the system as well as their individual groups, and just see how exploring these can support their learning in ACPE and the outcome and indicators.
It's fascinating.
We now have 8 people within our team that are CBCT instructors, so that helps a lot too. We have CBCT meditations throughout, every week that people can attend. We have crosswalks with the ACPE outcomes with the enduring capabilities of CBCT.
What are the crosswalks about? Tell me more about what are the crosswalks?
So we have a crosswalk for the ACPE outcomes and indicators. And then we also have, crosswalks with the, BCC, competencies for the CCSH, competencies that we have as part of the manual for CCSH. So, when we have all these, the different categories and, like spiritual formation and integration, awareness of self and others, relational dynamics, spiritual care interventions, professional development, all those different categories of ACP outcomes we put along with the outcome and then put some of the enduring capabilities of CBCT alongside those to see, oh, yeah, this skill is going to help me accomplish this, as I'm doing my learning goals and my final evaluation. And then with the BCC, it's the first thing, these kind of physical crosswalks. And just to say, too, as part of the embedding of this, of course, our collaboration with the Compassion Center and Dr. Nagy and Tim Harrison, who's the associate director of CBCT, has been so vital, and Tim Harrison has really been a co-developer of this all the way along, and as well as our amazing faculty and George Grant and Dr. Nagy. So this is an ongoing consultation we have with the Compassion Center. It's a collaborative effort. So we keep getting, as CBCT deepens, we bring that forward to CCSH as well, since CBCT is the foundation of that model.
Yeah, and you just had a consortium as well on, discussing, uh, a lot of the research that's happening with, CBCT, where you had just a few not very famous people like Richard Gere.
That was the launch. That was the Compassion launch of the new Compassion U platform, which is so exciting to see how people from all around the world have found a way to integrate this model. So we could talk more about that if you like.
Yeah, yeah. I think we do have a question that goes into that. Um, but going back to, the CCSH model, and as you're teaching students, because being a certified educator, uh, and working with people over at Emory, and having done that for a few years, it could be a challenge to work with, one of the beautiful challenges is you get a bunch of brand new students to chaplaincy and to chaplaincy education and uh, to spiritual education. So with the CCSH, teaches chaplains to prepare, attune, assess compassion, and to also, to entrust the care seeker, the person that we're providing the care for. So, which stage do you find that your CPE students or the CCSH students tend to struggle with the most? And what usually happens? Why do they struggle with it?
So, the 4 stages, as you said, prepare the care responder, attune to relationship, which is attune to self and other, and then accessing compassion and entrustment is, it's like it's interesting for different folks, it's different stages that are more challenging initially. Like, I was saying about that learner who was saying, "Oh, I've never attuned to myself before." So, in the midst of a visit, to take care of myself while I'm caring for others, that's like, I automatically think I am taking away the energy from my care to the other person. So, as they get more practice with some of these things with CBCT, they actually see that they're creating more inner spaciousness, especially through those early modules, to have more flexibility to be with whatever is and to linger a little bit longer in the suffering because they have more confidence that they can take care of themselves while they're in it. So as they develop more of that and they say, "Oh my gosh, I can attune to myself in the midst of the visit." And that's helping me actually see more as I notice more shifts within myself, that there's shifts that are happening in the care seeker that I can then tend to. So that's one of those, I think, thresholds of seeing that you can attune to yourself while attuning to other. And I have some cases I can share whenever that makes sense. But yeah, just brief snippets of some cases. But I think another one, when we talk about accessing compassion, this is after you assess where the person is in their zone of well-being, whether or not they can take in new insight, if they're grounded enough. And of course, this shifts throughout the visit, so we're shifting with them. Um, is to see, like, to become more aware that the care seeker has resources already. And that this can become more visible the more we have done the practice ourselves, and we could become more aware of all the resources within ourselves. We can say, "Oh, they're a full human being. They have a lot of resources." So I don't feel this heaviness. So both those stages, I think, have been something that we see some initial challenge with, and naming that helps to deepen their practice and open up possibilities in our experience.
So let's talk about your study for a little bit, if that's okay. There's so much there that we're curious about. But one thing is that you've been able to actually measure some changes in the chaplains, the CCSH trained chaplains, according to the study, experienced significantly less depression after their consults using this model. So, talk to us a little bit about what that means for the credibility of chaplaincy within healthcare systems because we are all using measurable outcomes. That was something that you actually were able to measure. And how was that measured? And tell us what you learned about that.
Well, this is a great time to mention our incredible research team. That has helped us with this throughout. Dr. Jenny Mascaro, Dr. Chuck Razan, Kim Palmer, George Grant, Carolyn Peacock, Deanna Kaplan, Roman Politsky. I'm just wanting to mention some because I mean this is a huge group that's done this and they're much more knowledgeable than I am about this research element. But what I continue to learn from them is that, I think in this PLOS study, they were looking at, which was having a control group study for this type of thing was really a major accomplishment. And again, thanks so much our faculty for being willing to work with that and our learners. So being able to separate out two groups and see which, group, in comparing them with the folks that had the CCSH, the folks that didn't, and the different measures. One of the things they looked at was because there was a separate study on just the chaplains and if this was of help to them. And in this study, we really focused on whether the chaplains who had CCSH providing care, if the patients reported less indicators of depression following the visit. So they did, of course, this careful, rigorous preparation for the study and clearance for the study, and then they were able to review charts, they were able to review different documents and different, assessment tools to, um, to see if there was this indication of less in depression. I think they also did a type of survey with the patients. So maybe let me step back from the reviewing of charts. I think it was more of the surveys that they did. They might have also done some, cross-reference with that, but I think they asked permission of the patients before and then spent some time with them after.
I was wondering about that because about the language piece of that, because in the study it's talked about how the chaplain's language changed, but also in the way that what the chaplain said communicated to the patient assisted the patient in changing their own framework for understanding their suffering, if I understand that correctly. So I was wondering, is when I was in CPE, I remember learning about how emotions are contagious and how the presence that you bring into the room really affects the patient and how they experience their situation. But there's another level to this, according to what you're presenting, which is the way we talk to the patients about about what's happening is also contagious. Am I understanding that correctly? Like how does that uh, not shame, but how does that framework shift happen for the patients based on how the chaplain is presenting it? I don't know if I'm asking that really well, really well.
No, that's a great question because this is a big research question, and that we're continuing to do more research on it because we have I think 170 or 200 recorded visits where they're looking back and seeing the language. And so there's a lot more to unpack here. And I love talking to the researchers and just hearing how they're thinking through how to test different things with different measures. But what seems to be from this PLOS study, which there's been more consideration and development of other ideas to research since then. But this idea of this clout, which is one of those um, words that's used in research that was kind of new to me, but they're thinking about this capacity, perhaps that CBCT and CCSH gives for spiritual health clinicians to feel a sense of confidence that when they're in the room, it's not about grasping confidence or grasping clout or grasping authority. It's more about understanding that there's a we here, that there's a sense that there's a collaboration that's happening. I mean, this is me putting some of my perhaps insights into this, but I think that's one of the things that is being explored is this what they've noticed is that chaplains who took CCSH use more of that we language. And so, anecdotally, what I've noticed after hearing, because we have a fellowship program post um, f- the residency where they are here for 2 years and they do 60 cases of this CCSH. So we have thousands of cases now. And what we've done is sitting with people as they've done this is that we get more of a cultivated sense, again, anecdotally, that they are able to trust more, that they can lean into the vulnerability and see that there's something already there. That they as they quiet themselves, become more mindful of, this human in front of them that has these resources, then they can overhear some of those and make them visible, those resources, and maybe use that as a bridge to bring some new insight. So it's not about imposing, it's not about, forcing, it's about that co-creation. And would this be a good time to talk about a case of that?
Yes, absolutely.
There was a study where, one of the cases, the fellows that was, when they came into a room, they had heard that from a fellow, chaplain, a care responder, that there was a complicated case with an AD, and we all advanced directive. We can all resonate with that. There's always more layers to that, right? And so they had family member was getting very activated, was really out of their zone of well-being, and was causing a lot of challenge and was accusing people all around that they weren't doing what they could. And what had happened was that the care, um, seeker, patient was not able to complete an AD at this time because of, their medical condition. And so the responder needed to really do some work on their way to the visit to cultivate this awareness, this prepare the care responder, to cultivate this awareness that this person was perhaps activated, that they are like me, they're a human being that want to have well-being and to avoid distress, and that they are, because they're out of their zone of well-being, they probably can't think through these things. So they wanted to be present and see how they could attune to them. So this is just reading a little bit of what they said. Um, when I entered the room, the CS was angry, closed off, and out of her zone of well being. After speaking to the patient and settling myself into a posture of listening and focus, so that attuned to self, I indicated to the care seeker that I would like to be of help. So this was the family member, but wondered if she could fill me in on what had been going on with the patient. This curiosity, this kind of, sometimes we talk about this attuned listening, is grounding, seemed to help the care seeker open up a little bit, and she began to share about the hospitalization and her frustrations and worries about why the document hadn't been done and what to do next. I offered mostly warm hearted listening, acknowledging and allowing her distress as she shared her story. This continued to melt away some of her initial distress, this warm hearted listening. She turned her body toward mine while sitting and uncrossed her legs. So these are noticing shifts, right? But she was still overwhelmed and fixated on the document, which could not be completed at this time. As she was sharing, I asked her to tell me a little bit more about her relationship with the patient, and she revealed that they had been together for 10 years and shared some meaningful memories between the two of them. I noticed a shift in her tone, so I took the opportunity to pause and simply acknowledge the importance of their relationship and the nurture of those shared memories. So kind of dropped into this nurturing moment module and saw that there were some nurturing moments being reflected on and rested in. And so informally used that module one practice of sitting in that nurture. The CS, the care seeker, the patient, took a deep breath, and this is the family member, I'm sorry, as she exhaled, seemed to totally open up and settle back into her zone of well being. She shed a few tears and affirmed what I had said about their relationship. At this point, I moved closer to the CS and squatted down by the couch. There were papers and jackets on the other seat, so I could more physically attune to the CS. It was then that she revealed the deeper source of distress, that she was worried about the way when this person might need to go back to another setting, that there might be some neglect, and that this was maybe part of what contributed to the patient's condition. And I thank the CS for sharing with me and engaged some self-compassion interventions, module 4 and 5, acknowledging what a heavy burden that was to carry, that she was doing all she could, and that things were not 100% in her control as she contemplated this patient going back to this other setting. I reflected back to the CS the sense of compassion and care that I saw in her and acknowledged that as a strength. This is kind of coming out of module 7, this deepening our sense of gratitude. noting the ways that this was really a difficult situation and she was still choosing to be a fierce advocate for the patient despite the circumstances. This seemed to offer her comfort despite the unchanged situation.
I think if more people and hospital administrators read these stories, they would understand the contributions maybe that chaplains bring that are so difficult to measure, but that is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
I'll pick on myself. What I have used before I really got into studying using effective language and charting, it's so much more than chaplain provided a non-anxious presence, chaplain provided reflective listening, chaplain provided life review. Uh, it goes way past that and being able to explain. Uh, what I always like to say is uh, letting people see what's behind the curtain. That the Wizard of Oz is really just we're people pulling levers, and we have a certain skill, but that showing people what that skill is and what we are actually doing does take practice and skill. But so does being able to chart it and use that specific effective language.
Yes, well said. Yeah. And this, we have these sources of distress that we indicate that are maybe perhaps underneath some of what's being presented that are CCSH informed. And then we have care responses that are CCSH, CBCT informed. And so these are just like learning scales and learning the language that can perhaps give us new ways to communicate with the interdisciplinary team. And then once we kinda learn the scales, we have a lot more flexibility to continue to use what makes sense to us, and at any time, we have flexibility with these, so it's not like when you see this, you always do this. It's more like, "Oh, as I'm familiar with some of these different sources of distress that might be underneath, such as over-identification with thoughts, fixation on one aspect of a situation. That's a source of distress that is in that case we just explored, that person was very fixated on the document, and so that was very hard for them to settle in and hear the resources that they had within them, that the chaplain co-created that experience with them to enhance awareness of thoughts and emotions as fluid and changing, not fixed, and as well as self-compassion, embracing the outcomes are not 100% anyone's control. So these are just more like things to consider that can become more spontaneously available that we can find a creative way to bring forward.
It almost sounds like compassion has a linguistic fingerprint and something that's measurable in how we speak. And Maureen, I guess some people, some critics are concerned. I know we just had uh, the research consortium, the State of the Science, that was with Association of Professional Chaplains and Transferring Chaplaincy. And one of the questions that took place that happened just yesterday, and uh, some of the concerns that were raised, especially when we were talking about models of assessment and models of care, is that some critics worry that like, research-based and manualized approaches actually make spiritual care too clinical, too rigid. So I would love I'd love to hear how do you respond to that tension between we have this structure and this evidence-based practice, but also, if we come from a religious or spiritual background, there's this sacred mystery. And if so, where do we find? How do you respond to that tension between the structure and also the mystery?
I love that, and thank you for all the amazing work of that symposium like you had yesterday. I mean, all this ongoing questions and conversations are so key. I'm thinking it might be helpful just to talk about here one of the definition that we've borrowed of spirituality from the European Council, the U.S. consensus definition of spirituality, because I think that points to maybe our hope. It's just a brief definition. Spirituality is the dynamic dimension of human life that relates to the way persons, individual, and community experience, express, and or seek meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and the way they could connect to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, to the significant and or sacred. So, in that definition of spirituality, there's a lot of spaciousness. So, we're saying this is kind of what's underneath our hope for giving this these practices of CBCT that help us become more aware of how to be present in these 4 stages that we're talking about in CCSH with a sense of, uh, cultivated awareness of the increased options we have in any given moment, to polish our lens through these practices of awareness, to catch these sparks earlier when we are about to impose or try to fix, rather than, um, be with whatever is, with this awareness of, the resources that are present within myself and the other and in this co-created space. So the manualized approach is more like, again, when you're learning an instrument or learning any skill, you're saying, here are the different, scales, here are the different things to be aware of, here are the foundations that we're building on, all what that people are bringing, and ACPE's rich context and learning to say, let's keep continuing to look underneath. What is there? What are the conditions that help us be more present to help engage this definition of spirituality? And perhaps this is even helping us see how we can be of help with this compassion lens to people who do not identify with any tradition, because it's made more visible the universality of these resources that are expressed in different ways. So the manualized approach for me is more like, let's just all kind of get on the same page, see how we can deepen some of these skills. And this is just one way of doing it. And then let's go. Let's get creative. Let's see how we can bring all these things together in a way that has more of a sense of we can talk about what we're doing. It's not this mystery. It's not a mystery in the sense that people don't know what chaplains are doing. We can make it more visible. And this is one of the things that our chaplains have said. I can speak much more detail about what I'm doing to the interdisciplinary team. And that helps us get this co-created care um, more visible, how we can all participate. And then honoring the mystery of our spirituality, honoring the fullness of the person's humanity, the fullness of their connection to their faith source, and being present to that with a sense of reverence rather than a sense of fixing. And this is what ACP has done forever, but this is just maybe perhaps seeing what are the conditions underneath that we can continue to refine.
The thing I like about what you discussed was that it's not this, the model's not the purpose. The model is, once again, it's one of many tools that we can utilize to enrich the skills of the presence that we already bring from ourselves, the appropriate use of self, the appropriate use of our own faith tradition, and also engaging with the faith tradition or the values of the person, of the care seeker, the person receiving the care. So no, I think that that's very good to keep that in mind, that it's one of many models we can use, but also how can you engage with it in a way that it's also a source of resilience for the chaplain themselves. They don't get burned out as much.
To piggyback on that, John, I'm curious, Maureen, what insights have you learned or can you share about how CCSH might help with empathy fatigue or helping chaplains sustain compassion, day after day, year after year, after being exposed to so much trauma and just the enormity of caring for people in very dire circumstances. How can you speak to that?
Thank you. Yes, this is an evolving question. And one way, I just one case came to mind, and this is just one way of cultivating these inner conditions. But this we have a chaplain who was a fellow who was in a behavioral health unit, and there were a lot of really, of course, traumatic things unfolding around him, and he noticed a care seeker, a patient who was about to be, was having a lot of trouble, and they were trying to think how they can get him back into his room so they can stabilize him. And the staff was, feeling somewhat, activated and trying to manage this. And the chaplain just was in touch with their own sense of cultivated sense of that the common humanity with this person, and not that the other staff weren't, but this was a moment where they were just able to access that and went toward, the care seeker and just and remembered a conversation that they'd had before and just said, "I remember your grandmother and the wisdom that you shared." And I'm just remembering that was such a resource for you, and I'm wondering if you can just take a few deep breaths with me and take in that warmth that your grandmother gave you. Just take a few deep breaths. And because they'd established some trust before, that was very helpful. And then they were able to do that, and as the care seeker would get activated again, they would just kept continue with the breath, and he kept saying, "I'm with you. I'm with you. And, your grandmother's here with you too." And that was able to create those conditions. And so what he was saying too in reflection was that that connection that he felt with the patient added to his well-being. He was able to rest in as he saw the connection unfolding, that he was able to rest in that too and say, "Oh, yes, we're connected." This is and then the staff was like, What did you do? What happened?" And so they got curious, and he was able to share with them some of what he was doing in the language, and so this capacity to notice what we need in the moment and to notice when there are opportunities to rest in connection with others, as well as in rest and nurture within ourselves, and to take broader perspectives that give us relief. Like if, separate from this case, if you're in the middle of a visit and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm really not doing well. This is not going well. The patient is not receiving my care." Rather than maybe disengaging, because sometimes that's one of the things that happens is that we can either become so infused, enmeshed with the care seeker and their feelings with this more empathic, affective empathy that we can become so infused we forget that they have resources, we have resources. Or on the other extreme, when we encounter suffering, we can become more distant, like, okay, there they are, here I am, and that we lose the benefit of connection. So we become burned out through disconnection. So this third way of compassion, this warm-heartedness is what we are talking about that helps support people in the long term. And some days it's harder to access than others, but we just keep trying. Yeah.
It's beautiful, description.
It really is so important, because I know when I was first starting out as a chaplain and first starting out in all my training, I wrongfully, and I say wrongfully for my own, what was not helpful for me was I thought I needed to go in and feel everything along with the person who I was caring for, and that was exhausting.
Yes, I join you. Yes.
And I was sitting here going, "How do how do people do this?" I wanna and so for me, I kind of I imagine that, the way that I picture that is always the person, uh, going in and with no other help, just jumping in quicksand with another person and then drowning together with them. Uh, but what I hear you say is that this warm-heartedness, this compassion, uh, that is utilized through CCSH is a way that we can keep one foot firmly planted on the ground while also joining with the other person and holding their hand together, amidst their being stuck in the quicksand of grief or life or whatever.
Yes, and just to say, just, what you're saying, like that warm-heartedness in CBCT, the defini and in CCSH, the definition of compassion is the warm-hearted concern that unfolds when we witness the suffering of others and feel motivated to relieve it. So it's this warm-heartedness that's cultivated through all the 8 modules to see how I can get this felt sense of common humanity, this sense of our interconnection, our interdependence on one another, this tenderness that can arise from that. This is a third way of caring about it. That's the empathic concern, which is the same as compassion. Like, if we can care about it, to see that that's really something, that's because it helps us linger longer to see what then the next right action might be.
Well, the way you're describing that, it makes me envision those encounters as feeling to the chaplain rather than draining experiences. Because I think a lot of times we talk about consults and visits in a way that is draining and exhausting, like you said, John, and then the chaplain needs to run away to the office for a little while and recharge. And I'm not saying that's still not needed, but the way that you're framing that, it sounds like there's an opportunity for that chaplain to receive some of that rest even during that consult and not feel drained afterwards.
Yes, and there's still, like you said, there's still the draining part, and that's part of the entrustment at the end to see what you need after the visit to refuel. But I think that it creates, like you said, more of the possibility for us to take care of ourselves in the midst of it. And that's what we've heard anecdotally. And I think that's something else to keep researching. And there's one case that Dr. Mascaro is doing with some research fellows about looking at the first um, cases that our fellows do when they start, and then the final cases they do, and kind of notice what some of the differences are in the and how they use the model, and how they talk about their caring for themselves as well in the midst of the visit. So yeah, hopefully that that's the case, and anecdotally I've heard that.
We have a lot of people who are with ACPE who also listen and certified educators on this podcast. How do you see this transforming the supervision and certification process for future CPE certified educators? And what would you like to see happen with it?
Thank you so much. I love that because I've been so involved in the certification of educators for a long time in my career at the regional level, at the national level, and helped some with the new ACPE outcomes and indicators. And I just am so um, I've been shaped so much by that, and I've been talking to some educators, longtime educators I worked with on those certification, and I'm thinking of one in particular when we were presenting this model, just said, "Oh, this feels like something that was missing. This feels like something, this kind of capacity to check in more with the inner world and to see you can be with whatever is arising with more kindness and the inner spaciousness that creates." And you can see as an educator, like with any of our field in spiritual health, it's just one path. But as you're helping to work with others and shaping them, that this capacity to catch these inner sparks and to see how you can be with like these habits that may not be supportive of living into your values as an educator. And also seeing deepening the sense of self-compassion and deepening the sense that we can co-create as educators. And this is already very much a part of ACPE education. Um, and I think also it can help with this sense of equanimity um, when you are in challenging situations, and as a leader in spiritual health across all these fields of board certification and education, to get more of a sense of discerning, stepping back and observing what are the different factors here and how can we use the mindfulness practices as well as this capacity to take these broader views to help serve the most people for the longest period of time and discern what qualities help with that. So I think it can help with all the competencies for CECs and getting under some of these tendencies we have, these habits, and broadening the perspective about that, as well as helping educators co-create. You know, helps educators be able to access this kindness for themselves in the midst of their certification process, as well as in their work as educators. Because kindness creates flexibility and judgment narrows.
That's a great quote right there. Say it again.
Kindness, broadens the perspective and judgment narrows. And kindness creates more possibility. Yeah. And that's what we hope for all of us in this vocation. I know it's just, yeah, we want to be about creating more ways for wholeness.
It reminds me of the picture of grace. The idea of grace is a free gift, unearned. And when you give grace, there's it's almost though you just threw a bunch of dirt and manure and seeds together and water, and you're just like, there it is. Growth is gonna happen. We think.
And, part of the hope too as educators that we hope it helps with the group education too, is understanding how to work with groups. And in the CCSH model, after people go through and become registered clinicians in this model after the 60 cases that people can then learn how to bring this more to groups and teams of staff and in terms of working with them in these protocols that are being developed. And so grateful again for Carolyn Peacock and George Grant and Tim Harrison and as we all work together to develop these different models to bring them forward to different settings in the healthcare. So yeah, this is one way, but we're so grateful to be able to research it and to be in uh, conversations with multiple spiritual health departments across the country because we've taught this at the Cleveland Clinic. You know, Amy Green was one of the early educators to get trained as a CBCT teacher, and the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Northside here in Atlanta, Amani Lagagner, educator who has really leaned into this. Of course, Wellstar John and Roz Curry at Grady, Cora Saunders, and Blake Tram, and UCSF, Susan Conrad, and Allison Kassenbaum at UCSD. So we've been having these great conversations with folks, and so we just keep hoping to continue that. So it's a process, yeah.
Well, Maureen, you've given us so much to think about today, and I know we could keep talking for another hour, but we always like to finish our interviews with our guests with this one question, which is, "What's giving you life these days? What's bringing you joy?"
Well, thank you. I love that question, and I think one of the things that spontaneously came as was entertaining that was music. I'm a singer and I write contemplative music, and I started to we just had a concert recently and just wanting to do more writing, and whenever it can be of help to lead that music. Um, I wanted to say too, but this is really something that's given me life. Compassion U is a new learning platform that the Compassion Center at Emory is hosting. They did that launch for. And so if people wanna learn more about that, it's a asynchronous model that also has facilitation that helps make it more accessible for people to take CBCTs. You can go to compassion.emory.edu and go on the Compassion Shift and register for that, and, I love teaching CBCT and CCSH. As a long-term educator, I've been at Emory for 35 years off and on, but been an educator more for like 27 years. I it's been so renewing for me for my own self-care and to find different ways and different language to help the co-creation and the education happen, and I'm constantly nurtured, by our learners and our interns, residents, and fellows, and our amazing team here at Emory. So I just can't believe that got to be a part of this. It's like it's such a gift that keeps giving, as, one of our educators, Carolyn Peacock, says. So I'm just grateful and like to share with you, and we hope it can be of support to our folks as they go through board certification, and 3 of our folks just went through board certification successfully this last time, and they integrated some of this learning of CCSH into that, so we love, to be, partners, in this way. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for all of your work. The study is fantastic, so people can learn more about that too. And thank you for helping us see that compassion is not just a feeling, there's a framework, it's a discipline, and it can be measurable. Can have a measurable impact in healing. So, thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Yeah, this has been a wonderfully enriching. Also, to our listeners, if you're a CPE student, a certified educator, clergy, if you're a healthcare professional, um, this also means that compassion is teachable, sustainable, and transformative. Um, so, yeah, I think we'll put you in the comments below in the doobly doo uh, the resources on Compassion U and Emory Spiritual Health, and also in the Compassion Center. Uh, and also, we invite you to join us next time where we're going to continue to navigate the sacred intersections of care and science.
And now it's time for the non-anxious presence with Elise Tremaine.
And John Betts. This was a very rewarding. It's funny. Sometimes the conversations that I have about resilience and about compassion, sometimes when I have a training on it, it's the least relaxing or least life-giving training that I can hear because, sometimes it can get so dry. I can hear Maureen, uh, talking about this just because for me, I I showed my hand at it. I've taken CBCT and have done the first, 12 hours of the CCSH training. Uh, so yeah, that, full disclosure on that, but it's also just it's the passion and the love that Marine has for that, and also how applicable, uh, it is to both chaplains who are just starting out and chaplains who might need to have a new tool in their tool belt.
Yeah, there were lots of takeaways for me, but I think the first thing I want to say is it just honestly made me in awe, made give me a sense of awe for chaplains and chaplaincy because it gives, I think, language to what we do and not language and skills, like, right? So, a framework and the skills. But for a long time, holding space has is now kind of a buzzword that you hear everywhere, but but that is what chaplains have been doing. So I love how Maureen talks about spaciousness and how this compassion framework helps you, and kindness, like she said at the end, helps you broaden perspectives and make space for the other. And the other thing that really stood out to me throughout this whole conversation was that aspect of collaboration and co-creation in spiritual care. Instead of coming in with this savior attitude, to be able to recognize the gifts and the resources in the other person and come alongside them as a chaplain. I think that's a beautiful framework for chaplaincy.
I agree. I love that the challenge for that is it's the co-creation means that the other person has to be, number 1, a willing participant, uh, and that also means that there's a lot of mystery that we cannot control, and so being able to walk into that room, walk in and see the family, see the patient, um, and go, "I don't know how this is gonna turn out." It kinda brings everybody back to square one of, we need to make sure that what we're doing isn't just unpacking the same old bag of tricks, like, "Oh, I'm coming in and I know exactly what I'm gonna do. I know exactly where I'm gonna go." Um, I loved what, yeah, you mentioned the, uh, giving language for what we've already been doing. I wrote down some of the things that was in the case study she said. It's like, provided warm-hearted listening, legs became uncrossed. There was a shift in tone, and that she was turning into the nurturing moment, and how it was, being able to say and notice and be present for subtle ways that we can demonstrate that what we're doing actually has some sort of outcome, some sort of visible, observable outcome of the care. Because I know, as I'm talking with the people that at my workplace, one of the questions they always have for me is, what are some of the ways that we can talk about the outcomes, either the anticipated, the, observed, or, the intended outcomes of what we're providing. So that's I'm like, "That's a fantastic question, and you need to write a paper on that."
The other thing that I wrote down when she said it was that third way that compassion offers. You know, how she talked about how we tend to either become enmeshed with the patient or create some distance. And there's that third way that the warm heartedness gives us. And it goes back to that co creation and collaboration, I think, because, it can be so disempowering for somebody to be a care seeker, to be a patient. And so to be able to come alongside them without being enmeshed with them, I think can be very empowering for patients. And it reminded me of a story that another chaplain shared with me just recently. I think it was my friend Jessica, so shout out to Jessica. She was saying that, she was visiting with a cancer patient, and at some time after listening and sitting with them, she named this person's resources, and she said, "You were very brave." And the person started crying and said, "I've never been called brave before." Like, it was the first time that she recognized that resource in herself. And so I think it's so powerful to give people the ability to be seen and to pull out those resources for them to see instead of thinking that we're going to bring the resources, to them or that we need to have that pressure to make something happen in the visit other than being that witness and presence for people.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah. It reminds me of being in CPE, and it was coming up to the very day right before we had to do a verbatim, and, sometimes talk about pressure, I'd be like, "Where are you going?" "I'm gonna go up and get a verbatim." It's the wrong way of doing pastoral care, spiritual care, uh, but that's part of CPE, trying to learn, okay, well, what whose needs are really being met?
Yeah.
I think one of the pieces that I thought would go along well with this, because CBCT comes from the Lojong Tibetan Buddhist background, I thought it would be a nice piece to end with, what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has written, because he has a lot of wonderfully viral quotes, but I think it's nice to see that this is not something that is just coming out of nowhere, but this is something that has been practiced for thousands, if not, uh, as long as people have been able to, uh, be with another, person or be with another being, it's something that's present. So, uh, this is, from Ethics for the New Millennium, and, uh, the Dalai Lama writes, "Genuine compassion is not just an emotional response, but a firm commitment founded on reason. Therefore, a truly compassionate attitude toward others does not change, even if they behave negatively. Of course, developing this kind of compassion is not easy. As a start, we should realize that everyone desires happiness and does not want suffering. And we have the same right to overcome suffering as they do. And on that basis, we cultivate concern for their welfare and develop a sense of responsibility for their happiness."
It's that shared humanity that Maureen talked about in this episode. Thanks for that, John, and thanks to our listeners. We hope to see you next time.